On this episode of the show, I am delighted to be joined by television writer and producer Matt Osten. We reminisce about our time in university together where he met his future partners Tas Melas, Phil Elder, and Jason Doyle. He tells us about the history of the Basketball Jones and the starters, adding Trey, Kerby, and Leigh Ellis to the team, moving to America, the struggles with producing live television, and a whole lot more. I had a ton of fun catching up with Matt, and I think you will too. So without further ado, on with the show. All right, I am delighted to be joined today by producer of the Basketball Jones on The Score in Canada and the starters on Nbatv, Matt Osten. How are you doing today, Matt?
I'm doing great, Phil. Guy that I don't know.
Yes. Well, I was gonna get to that. I was gonna just leave it, ambiguous. I've known Matt. I've known you for a long time. Old friends since university. Unfortunately, it's been too long since we've spoken. That's a tragedy. I think the last time was the NBA All-Star game in Toronto.
Oh yeah, then that is a while ago.
Yes, but we of course got to know each other in university, and I'm sure we'll get to that. But we're not here to talk about me. We're actually here to talk about you.
Great.
So before we get to sort of your career as a producer, let's go back to maybe growing up a little bit. You grew up in Montreal, and Montreal is a francophone. Quebec is francophone, but you're an anglophone. You don't really speak French, so maybe you can talk about that experience.
It was funny because I grew up with in a pretty English area of Montreal, and my parents were both anglophones in the sense that, I mean, they were first generation immigrants. My grandparents were all from Europe, from Eastern Europe, and then post-war they all, through various circuitous routes, made their way to Montreal. And when I went to also an English school, I mean, obviously we were taught French, and grade 6 was in French immersion. So I did speak French, and there was a time when I was, I'm not going to say fully fluent, but relatively fluent. And those days are long gone. I mean, I've been gone from Montreal since I was 18, pretty much, except for 3 years in the middle when I went back for law school. But it is actually really sad. And I hope no one from Quebec listens to this because they will be angry at me.
Well, hopefully they'll appreciate your honesty. So you're growing up, and you decide that you want to go to university and study broadcasting, radio, television arts at Ryerson, which is where we met. So what was it that drew you to media, and did you have any specific goals or aspirations that you were looking towards?
First of all, go Rams.
That's right. Yes.
Go Rams was something I think I never said while I was there, but now that we're not there, it's fun to pretend that we had a lot of school spirit.
Yeah. It was a commuter school. There was like no school spirit at all.
No, there was zero school spirit. I think I actually did go to one basketball game though. And I lived on campus, so for the first year I lived on campus, so there was really no reason not to, but except the reason was that no one did, and it was a thing that no one talked about and no one was excited about, so I guess that was the reason why.
I think the team has actually gotten pretty good. I think the Rams were a pretty good basketball team a few years ago and might have gotten close to Canadian championships, if not won it.
Yeah, I remember Skeets, otherwise known as Phil. Other Phil, not you, obviously, from Ryerson. I remember him being excited about it for at least a year, but I was not following it.
That's some real deep basketball talk.
Yeah. It's the NBA that's deep enough for me. I don't go into even American college, so Canadian college is a real step. But why did I want to go to Ryerson in the first place? I think actually from what I remember, I was in CEGEP, which in Quebec you do 11 grades of high school, and then for 2 years you go to this thing called CSHEP, which is kind of like a junior college. And there was a room there that was the um, like advanced placement. That's not the right term. What's the term I'm looking for? Like a guidance counselor, except there was no guidance counselor. You would just go into this room, and there'd be brochures from universities across Canada. And I found this Ryerson one. I hadn't really heard much about the program, and I just leafed through this brochure because this is kind of pre-internet, and people just seemed to be having fun, and they had cameras in their hands, and they were recording things with microphones and producing TV shows and scripts. And I was like, what? Like, this is because everyone else I knew, I was in liberal arts at the time, and everyone else was going on to do rigorous BAs in philosophy or history or the classics. And I was like, you mean for 4 years I could just go have fun and be creative and get a BA? That's okay. Yeah, I guess I'll do that. And I applied and got in. And that's how I ended up there in 2001.
That's pretty awesome, because it's a fairly competitive program to get into. So the idea that you just sort of were like, oh, okay, this is a nice idea to participate in, and you didn't really have you didn't have a background interest in media. Like, you weren't like I remember I was really drawn to media. I had aspirations of I don't know, being like Stanley Kubrick or something. And so that's what drew me in. But you didn't have anything like that, eh?
Well, I definitely did, because I was, at least at the start, actually more into music. I was playing in a band that played kind of bars around Montreal at the time. And
What was the band name?
the band was called Walker, and we were good, but also not good, if that makes any sense. Like, proficient, but not good. We didn't have the oomph, the sauce, the sort of punchy in the face connection with
Okay.
with the audience. We never really did anything. I think we recorded like a couple EPs that were just for friends, basically. But there were some actually really talented people in the band, much more talented than I was. As evidenced by the fact that there were two guitar players in the band, and I played guitar, but in the band I played bass because I was like, you are both
They
much
needed a
better than I am.
bassist.
Yeah, exactly.
That's right.
So I remember I had like a 4-track recorder, so I kind of taught myself how to do that. And the first year of radio and television, as I'm sure you remember, was all audio/radio. So I definitely, talked to that in my entrance interview. But you're right. I wasn't like plotting it from a young age to go to Ryerson.
Okay. And so at Ryerson, we already sort of touched on this, but you meet some pretty important people, your future partners. You meet, why don't you tell us about the people that you meet while you're there?
Yes, Ryerson was life-changing, at least in that sense, because in the very first year, we were all put into core groups. I forget how many people were in them, like maybe 25 people.
Something like that.
And it was kind of like your homeroom. You would basically do most of your classes with this group of people. And in that core group was JD, Jason Doyle, who is producer, director of Basketball Jones and the Starters, Tas Melas, who is the host, and you. Am I wrong? You were in it.
I wasn't in your core group in first year. In second year, we were in the same core group. But I knew of you periphery wise, and I think I was in the same core group as Tas. I think, actually, I don't think you were in the same core group as Tas.
Oh, really? Huh.
Yeah.
Well, there you go. Memory is a funny thing. We've actually had arguments because I've spent so much of the last 10 years of my life with those guys from college. I'm sorry, I call it college now because I'm American. And we would often, or like some like random name from Ryerson would come up, and then we'd argue like, were they in our core group? Like, that is actually an argument that we've had numerous times, and like we try to figure out a way to settle it, and
that's funny.
We would often pull on very random Ryerson memories in our in our office. And and then it was really only, I think, until third year that I met Phil Elder, who also known as Jay Skeets. And those are the three guys that started the Basketball Jones. They started it without me. So, I mean, do you want me to jump over
Sure.
university into? So basically, we graduate in 2005. You feel free to fact check me here, but that's right, isn't it?
Well. Let me actually cut you off a little bit before you get to the TBJ, because you guys did have a relationship in school where you were producing content, right? And in the last year of school, did you all work? You all worked on the same project together, right?
Not Tas, but me,
Oh,
JD, and Phil did. Yeah.
okay. So I don't know if maybe that's you want to talk about just sort of like the birth of that relationship, that working relationship, and
Yeah, for sure. Well, JD, first of all, I was in awe of the entire time. He seemed to know what he was doing more than anyone else that I was friends with. He just seemed to have a lot more experience, and it wasn't seemed, he actually did have a lot more experience. And he just had a confidence about him. I don't know if you remember that, but I just remember whatever the group project was, and they were all group projects because we were producing stuff. He would always take the hardest job. Like he would be the director or the station manager. The jobs that basically I was like, I'm definitely not doing that, because if I fuck up, it's going to be very noticeable. And if I screw up, then I'm going to be screwing it up for everyone. And JD was always the first to sign up for those roles. And when I asked him, he'd always be like, "What are you talking about? Why is that impressive? I'm paying to be in school to fuck up because it literally doesn't matter." And to me, I mean, school mattered a lot because I don't know, that's just the way that I was. But he had taken some time off, so I think he had a much healthier perspective on school. So JD, I was always like, whatever that guy's doing, I want to be working with him. And Tas and I were friends. He actually worked with JD on a radio show, an internet radio show, pre-podcasts on Spirit Live. And
I remember
then
it well. I had two shows on that station, and Phil also had shows on that station.
he did, yeah. We didn't do them together, but he had a show with his friend Steve. I don't even know what it was. Was it a comedy show?
I don't recall.
Uh, and then I also had a show on Spirit Live.
Oh, you
Uh,
did? What was
yeah.
yours?
What was it? It was a British rock show.
Okay.
And it was hosted by Charlene Chu. Shout out to Charlene, who was
Yes.
in my core group and who is also currently living in LA.
Oh, is she?
And
Okay.
yeah, yeah. And then in third year, when I met Phil, we became good friends. Then in fourth year, we had to do this practicum, which is basically a applied thesis. And JD, Phil, and I were in a group together. We did our thing together. Tas was doing his own thing, which I think was sports related actually, but I can't quite remember what it was.
Yeah.
And now is a great time for me to say you were doing your own thing and you won.
No, I didn't win anything. What do you mean I won?
What? I thought, weren't you zombies?
Okay. So I will. Yes, I was in Zombies. So I will. This isn't supposed to be about me, but I mean, I can talk about this project. So I don't know, like there was a class that you took in third year. I think this is important to note. You took a class in third year called The Pitch, which is
Mm-hmm.
essentially an introduction to producing. And I didn't take this class because I thought I didn't have any interest in production at all. I was like, oh, I'm just a creative mind. That's it, right? And so over the summer, in anticipation of fourth year, I wrote a nice script for like a short that I was going to produce, direct, edit, whatever for the practicum project. We pitched, and my pitch was utter garbage, right? And I didn't get picked.
Uh-huh.
And so that taught me a lesson. But moreover, I ended up joining somebody else's pitch, this zombie project, and I just went all in on that. And I wrote that, and I edited that, and I did special effects and casting and a whole bunch of work. And it did turn out to be a really good project that I was really happy with, but I don't know if we won anything. I don't
No, you
recall.
did. I'm telling you, you won. There was like an award for best practicum, and you guys won.
Great, great. I remember Tristan winning an award for best music or something, another of our friends, and I was really happy about that. But yeah.
Yes, very
Anyway,
talented.
yes, yes. Anyway, back to you.
Yeah, back to
And
me.
yes.
Um, where was I? Oh, you know what? One more thing. Fine. We'll front load the talking about you, and then we can move
Okay,
on.
okay,
But
okay.
I did want to give you credit because something that I remember for sure is I think in second year, could have been third year, but I think it was second. You gave me a external hard drive that just had a bunch of what I assumed to be stolen music on it, and it was still like hard in those days to get. It was like pre torrents, obviously pre iTunes. So you just gave me a bunch of stuff, and I was kind of like looking through this drive, and one of the things I found was "Shut Up, You Fucking Baby," which is
Oh,
one of
David
David Cross's
Cross.
stand-up album. I think it's
Yes.
his second album, and I remember listening to it on headphones in bed, like at night, so as not to disturb my roommates. And listening the first time, being like, I don't understand this. Where are the jokes in this? Because
Yes, it's
for someone used to kind of a set up punchline um, style of comedy, which is the only thing I'd ever seen, it was very disorienting. And then I remember like telling you like, "What? I don't get this. Is this funny?" And you were like, "It's really funny. Trust me." And I was like,
wow, really?
"Yeah." And I was like, "Fine. I am going to find this funny." And then I just like listened to the whole thing again. And then by the second time, I got it. And then from there, I started watching Mr. Show, and those were very big comedic influences on me. So I have to thank you for that.
Oh, you're welcome. I knew you were a fan of Mr. Show, but I thought that predated me knowing you. So I'm very happy that that was an influence. And yes, the music was pirated. And I would say that, and I really say that because I actually, as a teenager, I worked pretty hard at my part-time jobs, and I spent it poor choices, spent it on mostly on CDs. And I actually took the time to encode all of these CDs into high quality MP3s so I could have them. And then one day the drive got wiped, and I just said, "Fuck it, I'm just gonna steal everything after all that work." Oh man! So,
What were you working with then? A Kazaa, a LimeWire?
oh man, well yeah. So I mean I was deep into Napster when it launched. I
Oh
mean I
yeah.
abused the shit out of it. But yeah, I remember using Kazaa, LimeWire. Actually, I found something that still works today, called SoulSeek, and it's a really cool piece of software. But I
Oh
haven't
yeah, I
used it in.
remember that.
Yeah, it worked really well for. I was like getting full albums. I was never about getting a track. I like to get a whole album and listen to that, and SoulSeek made that easy. So anyway,
Yes, I remember that. You were. It was like just full of, and another was Songs Ohia. I don't know if you're still a fan, but that was the
I
first time I'd ever heard them or him, I guess, Jason Molina, and then followed him through that to Magnolia Electric, and like one of my favorite musicians of all time.
I am still a fan, although I haven't been acquainted with his music in a long while. Although one of the odd, I guess, bonuses of this quarantine or whatever, if you want to call it that, is I've been putting on albums like all day, catching up on old music, rediscovering bands I haven't listened to in ages, and listening to their new music, and that's been pretty rewarding. So maybe I'm gonna give Songs Ohia a refresh.
And then pull out that external hard drive. It's time.
That's right. That's right. All right. So we're at a university. Um, in the MySpace era, I believe, and
Yeah.
you decide, yeah, fuck that media. That's not what you want to do. So why don't you talk about that?
Well, so I will say in 2005 when we're graduating, I'm talking to JD and Phil, and I'm just going to call them Skeets from now on because it'll be less confusing.
Sure.
And so I'm talking to JD and Skeets, and we were like, why don't we start our own production company? Which I'm sure is a conversation that 75% of people in our program had at some point. And we agreed to it. We even had a couple of meetings, always over beers that would be very unproductive. But by the time the year was wrapping up, I was seized by kind of a panic and a terror as I started to hear about what the job market was like. And I was like, this doesn't seem like a career. Like, how could you make a living doing this? And even if you can make a living, it just seems like you constantly at the mercy of getting fired because your show doesn't get picked up or the network closes down. And again, this was Canada, which is obviously a much smaller media space in general. And I just thought, like, there's no way that one could have a career doing this. And I was like, I think I should go to law school. And I certainly did not ever want to go to law school. But the one thing that I will say is that I always did like the kind of humanities arts side of things. So even in radio and television arts, when we had to take courses in the general Ryerson pool, like things in history or philosophy, I actually always really enjoyed those classes. And McGill Law School had a very foundations based approach to law. So I thought that I would find it interesting. So I basically only applied to McGill. The reason why, you didn't have to have an LSAT to apply to McGill. And I figured, okay, well, if I get in, I'll go. And I applied and I got in. And I went. So in 2005, fall of 2005, I found myself back in Montreal, going to law school. And very quickly was like, this was a mistake. And it was basically 3.5 year program because you get your Bachelor of Common Law and Bachelor of Civil Law. Quebec has civil law. So it was an extra half year. And certainly by the second year, I was very unhappy. And the one thing that was a respite from my day is when I would be done studying, or more likely procrastinating from studying, I would, trying to think how to do it because this was pre-podcast, I would go online to Yahoo and I would click on this, embedded media player in a browser, and I would listen to my friends Skeets and Tas. I would listen to their podcast. So what happened when I was gone in 2006, so a year after I'd left Toronto, they were having some beers and they were all in various jobs, generally that had nothing to do with media. And they were like, let's do something to stay creative. And JD said to them, why don't we record a podcast? And they said, what the hell is a podcast? And this is 2006, like the iTunes store, I think, has maybe just opened. Trust me when I tell you, or maybe you remember that time, but no one knows what a podcast is.
So the iTunes store, well, maybe iTunes store on iPods had been around, but the iPhone had not launched, and certainly people did not know what a podcast was.
Yes. So I would listen to their show. And so they basically, when they got together, they were like, what should we talk about? And JD was going to always be on the tech producing side of it. So he was like, well, it's up to you guys because you're the ones that are talking. And they're like, well, we both like basketball. Why don't we talk about basketball? So it was a project that was mainly just for them as a hobby. But they put it online. And I think slowly people started to find it and download it and listen to it. And eventually, not that they were getting a ton of total viewers, but they suddenly started to get, an email from like South Korea or something. Someone being like, hey, I'm teaching English in South Korea and I can't catch any of the games because of the time difference. And listening to your show is super helpful to keep me up to date. And they're like, wow, people that are not our immediate families and friends are listening to this. That's pretty crazy. So over time, they went from once a week to twice a week. Then they started doing it daily. Then they started in probably 2008, I want to say, they started doing the show as a video show, which, sort of as crazy as doing a podcast was in 2006, doing a video podcast in 2008 was maybe even weirder and crazier. But they started to gain a small but very loyal following. And I watched and listened to every single one of their shows because I was, again, in law school and hating it and was happy to procrastinate by listening to my friends talk. So I graduate law school. I decide to take the New York bar. And the reason I decided to take the New York bar is because in Canada, if you take a bar in, let's say, Quebec or Ontario, you then have to article, which means you have to work at a firm and then you are a real lawyer. Whereas if you took the New York bar and passed it, you were a lawyer right away. And I kind of knew in the back of my head that I didn't want to work at a firm. I didn't really want to be a lawyer. So I just kind of thought, why don't I get the professional qualification and then I'll assess what's happening. So I go down to Albany, I take the bar, I pass it, I go through a very bad breakup, I move back home to live with my parents, and I'm like, wow, what happened here? I'm in a career that I don't want to be in, and living at home, and very much on a whim, like really, really on a whim. In the summer of 2009, I went on Craigslist and found a place on, where was it? Spadina Circle, like a real rat trap of a place that was like infested with raccoons. And that's not,
Oh,
I mean that quite literally. There were raccoons in the house. And with, 3 or maybe even 4 roommates, none of whom I knew. And I just went. And because it was the summer, the first job I had was I was working freelance at the Toronto Film Festival. And then that basically took me to the fall. And I was hanging out with Skeets and Tas and JD. And by this point, they'd been doing the show for 4 years. And one thing I didn't mention was they were doing the show for free. They were not getting paid to do the show. They would wake up early in the morning, they would record the show, put it online, and then they would all go to their regular jobs. And they were exhausted. And
yeah.
I think
I just want to just interrupt there because that the discipline that these guys had to do that show for all those years, every day in the morning, especially with the video work, it's crazy. Like it really needs to be commended, and it's a testament to why you guys were able to build off of that, right?
absolutely. I mean, I'm in awe of them that they did that. I mean, I've often thought if I had not left for law school and I was working with them, would I have had the discipline to, you know, work for free for 4 years? Maybe in total it was closer to 5 years by the time we got picked up by the score, which we'll get to. And it is. I mean, I'm really in awe of them that they were able to do it with such consistency. And they will tell you that there were often times when they were going to quit, which is not not surprising, considering that they were basically doing 2 full-time jobs and only getting paid for one. And they were tired and they were frustrated. And they would always say that at certain points, one of them would want to quit, but then 2 others would be like, no, 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 let's keep going. And then a few months later, one of those people that said we should keep going was like, you know what, fuck it, I'm quitting. And they were like, no, 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 let's just keep going for a bit. And in this time, there had been people that contacted them and were kind of like, well, why have you thought about monetizing this? And they were like, yeah, of course we've thought about monetizing it, but it's 2006 and then 7 and 8, and people aren't making a living off podcasting, and or even really anything, digital. I mean, this is kind of at the rise of blogging and making and having that be a potential career path, but still in its really nascent days. And so by the time I moved back to Toronto, I'm working for the film festival. Then it's the fall, the start of basketball season. And they were like, hey, man, since you're, you know, looking for a job, why don't you come in the morning and help us out with the show while you're looking for work? And I was like, sure, that would be awesome. And so we start working together again, and kind of immediately it clicks back into place, just like our college days. And again, it was like, wow, wouldn't it be great if we could do this for a living? And they were like, yeah, it would be great. It's not happening. And I was like, well, why don't let's see if we can't do this. And I don't know. I think they had been doing it so long and been kind of let down so many times that they were over it a bit. But I, being new and fresh faced, had more energy and enthusiasm than them maybe at that point. And I went around town trying to make connections and trying to pitch the show. And they had a relationship with the score a little bit because Tas was working there. What was he doing?
I remember this. He was doing like running clips or something, like creating like little clips for or video packages for sports. Like
he might have been like watching games and then helping cut them into highlights, or maybe even something like that. And we pitched the score, and then eventually, so I started with them in like, let's say September 2009, and then in February 2010 we started the score, and they hired us all full time. Everyone quit their jobs, and that was sort of the first big part of the journey. Well, I guess the first big part of the journey was them doing it for free for 4 years. This is, let's say, phase 2, getting paid to do it.
Okay, so that's awesome. You guys can commit to this full time and really go in on the project. So talk about, now transitioning to the score, having probably a real budget. Maybe there were rules, or did they have any demands from you? Like, talk about that experience.
Yeah, I'm trying to when we got to the score, they kind of left us alone because they didn't really know what we were doing. We weren't on TV at first, and it was a TV network, and that's how they paid the bills. But they obviously saw the writing on the wall that digital was going to be hugely important. And if you look at the score now, it is a online. It's an app exclusively. So obviously they ended up riding with that. But by the time we were there, it was really a TV station. So we were just a self-contained unit. How we always pitched ourselves and how we always got stuff done was that we were a turnkey solution. We did everything ourselves, from, writing to hosting to recording to engineering to producing to post-production to uploading to creating the thumbnails to, like literally everything. I was going to say soup to nuts, because you don't get to say soup to nuts enough or at all.
I do like turnkey because it's I often hear it at my work, so I enjoy that.
So you're more of a turnkey guy than a soup to nuts guy?
I'd say I'm definitely way more likely to say turnkey myself than say soup to nuts.
Yeah, turnkey is more like of the corporate, 20,000 feet view, circle back kind of parlance. But to me, soup to nuts is like a bunch of Jews in the garment district, trying to hash stuff out, and then that's much more my speed. So why am I even saying Jews? Because soup is involved? I don't know. It's unclear.
What does that expression even mean? What do you mean soup to nuts? What do we need? Like, why
we'd
would
really
the soup
have to
become
do.
nuts?
We'd have to do 7 seconds of research online, which neither of us are going to do right now. But there must be a reason.
It's more fun to talk about it, right? Like, so you don't know either.
No, off the top of my head, no, I don't know. Once I got so tired of people saying kit and caboodle, and it was annoying. It was like, what the hell does that mean? And I looked it up, and there's like a sensible answer that I don't quite remember, but I had to do with, I think, Dutch safecrackers, and like the kit and the caboodle was like like their tools that they used to crack into safes. So it was like, did you bring the whole kit and caboodle? Does that make any more sense? No, I guess it doesn't.
You never disappoint when it comes to the realm of idioms. That's for sure. It's just like your database.
Thank you. I guess I've never been complimented on that before. But let me take you back. It's 2010. We're eating our soup and we're munching on our nuts, probably almonds, 7 a day. Shout out to Barack Obama. And they're basically like leaving us alone, which is good in the sense because we are kind of figuring it out on our own. The things that we knew how to do, we knew how to podcast. We knew how to shoot like videos that were, ENG, kind of like one single camera, then take that footage, import it into Final Cut and edit it and upload it. We knew that, but we didn't know anything about studio television beyond what we were taught, in 2002. And I don't know if you can attest to that, but I don't know if you would have felt confident going from that class in 2002 into, producing live television. But I certainly was not confident about it.
Well, maybe if it had been like right out of school, I would have had like some naive confidence, like, oh, of course I know how to do this. But I feel like I would have been, smacked in the face real fast.
Yeah, yeah, I had no confidence. And so we were basically, like I said, left alone to kind of figure everything out. And eventually we did start to do a TV show for them that was once a week. And it was a studio show. It was not live, now that I think about it. And it was just a huge period of learning for me, and I assume for everyone. But it was basically anything that we wanted to do. We'd sit in our office and brainstorm ideas, and it was like, wouldn't it be cool if, I don't know, there was like, when it comes around to the trade deadline, all these reports would be like, sources say, multiple sources, sources with knowledge. And we were like, what if it was like everyone was attributing these quotes to like they're attributing to multiple sources, but what if multiple sources is actually a guy that is telling people all these things? So we were like, how do we shoot the thing where it's like you are interviewing the person like 60 Minutes style, but their face is kind of blacked out and then their voice is changed, and kind of like that green screen shot at the start of 60 Minutes where the host is sitting on a stool and it looks like kind of like a magazine page behind them. And, every time we came up with one of these ideas, we would have to figure out how to do it. And yes, it was just a time of learning from a technical point of view, also how to work in a corporation, how to work with different departments like the graphics department, like the editing department, to have bosses. So it was all, literally everything was new to me.
And that segment that you talked about, that was successful, right? The multiple sources. Like I remember, like that became a recurring theme, or it took off.
Was successful. I don't know. Now I feel like you denying that you won the practicum with your zombies project.
Well, I think like it got some traction. Like it was like an idea that like I remember it. I don't know what that means. Well, that's one of those ideas. Like I was watching. I've watched for a long time, but I remember that was a really good idea. It was clever and it really worked, and it was hilarious on its own, even regardless of the basketball context.
Well, yes, and that was the big thing, that JD and I, the people that were producing it, and JD, who was also directing it, we knew nothing about sports. More specifically, we knew nothing about sports programming. I grew up in Montreal. Obviously I was a diehard Habs fan, and I played hockey all throughout high school. But I literally knew no one that knew anything about basketball. And it's actually funny now because I don't know if you're watching The Last Dance, the Jordan documentary.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So, all this stuff is happening in the 90s when I obviously remember the late 90s very well. I was, in the 9th, 10th, 11th grade. I was graduating high school. And I'm like, it's crazy to me that I knew nothing about this. I didn't know that it was happening because I don't know why. I don't know. I just knew no one that was into basketball. No one was like, you should watch this. You should watch the Bulls. They're about to three-peat.
Not even the Olympics, the Dream Team.
The Dream Team I kind of knew about because I went to summer camp in America, and obviously it was a huge, story there. So I knew about it, but it was all like very abstract to me. Like I knew the name
Space Jam.
No, I've to this day I've never seen Space Jam.
Oh, I would say you're missing out, but that's not true. So
yes, I think we both know that's not true. So I know nothing about basketball. JD, same boat, but JD probably less of a sports fan than I am. And then we didn't have ESPN obviously because we're in Canada. We had TSN and then later Sportsnet, but we just didn't watch it a ton. And even like going to work at Nbatv, which is part of Turner Sports, which I know we'll get to. Sort of the legends of American sports broadcasting, like things like, let's say, PTI. I had never seen PTI. And I didn't know about the Dan Patrick, Keith Olbermann Sports Center. I mean, these things that are just so central to, I think, the average American sports fan. Just really, I just didn't know anything about them, and JD the same. So I mentioned that to say that we came to it not as a sports show, but as kind of a comedy show, because that's what we liked. And Skeets and Tas are both very funny. And the vibe of the show was like, hey, it's just like two of your buddies shooting the shit, having a couple beers, watching the game, except that they know a ton about the sport and they're really well researched and they have a ton of chemistry. So we came to it not from a sports perspective, and I think actually that was what made it stand out and what made it adaptable to this sort of new digital world where we by coincidence and timing happened to find ourselves kind of on the forefront of.
Yes, you were on the forefront of it, and that sort of brings me to something that I want you to talk about, and that is Like a Bosch. Can you talk about what that is?
Yeah, so Like a Bosch was definitely the first thing that went very viral at the time when the term viral, when people didn't quite know what that meant even. And what were the origins of it? I mean, there was the Lonely Island song "Like a Boss," which I wish I could be sure about this, but I'm almost positive this was before they were at SNL. Or am I? Do you have any idea if I'm right or wrong about that?
I don't. Nah, I only know of their SNL time.
And it was basically the format of the song was something something like a boss, something like a boss, and we just changed the like a boss part to like a Bosch. And actually now I'm also trying to remember, this would have been 2012.
Let me see.
No, sorry, not 2012. This would have been 2010 or 11.
2010. The Toronto Star viral Like a Bosch video skewers former rap star. November 17th, 2010.
Right. So he had just gone to Miami, is that right?
Yeah, it was. Yes, it was pretty much. Yeah, because there was a part of the song where you mention him flexing, and it's like him in the reveal.
Right, in their famous not one, not two, not three introductory conference. I think it was something like he was either like had said something negative about Toronto, which almost any athlete in the NBA that leaves, like he actually sounded like me 5 minutes ago in this conversation when he was like, "Oh yeah, Toronto, man, I couldn't watch ESPN, it sucked."
Yeah.
And so it kind of gently poked fun at him, and yeah, it was really successful. People probably, I think, people in Toronto took to it because I think there was some anger at him at the time. And yeah, Like a Bosch. It was. I'm not sure if we ever got. I think we actually might have gotten confirmation that he had seen it, and I think enjoyed it. But that was definitely our first big thing.
Yeah, there's nothing like too. I don't remember there being anything too bad. I guess I should have watched it before this. I'm gonna put it on my playlist to view when we're done.
Yeah, right. That and Songs Ohia for a great double feature.
That's right. Okay. So while you're at the Score and you're doing the Basketball Jones, you actually add some other people to the team. Maybe you want to talk about that.
Yeah, so we had been doing this daily podcast, and we're also doing this TV show once a week. And at the time, blogging was really, really important. Like, there was a ton of independent blogs, and there's really not really blogs anymore. But the ones that do exist are all kind of amalgamations, basically. And this was kind of in the era of, well, there's Deadspin, which was certainly like a bigger one, and then each team had their own blog, and it was just important to have your content aggregated by blogs that were bigger than you, and that's kind of the only way that people found out about you. I think Twitter existed, but it was very much in its early days. Um, Facebook definitely was a way to drive traffic, but the only way to really, get eyeballs or ears on your stuff was to get it listed on a popular blog. And so we had a lot of stuff that, you know, didn't lend itself to an audio podcast. And, when you do podcasts, you put out one a day. When you blog, you could put out, I don't know, 8 to 10 posts a day. So we realized we needed a blogger. And that's where Trey Kerby comes in. He's from outside of Chicago. He was friends with Skeets because he wrote for Yahoo, which Skeets also wrote for. And Skeets wrote for Ball Don't Lie, which was Yahoo's basketball blog. Eventually, when Skeets left that to join The Score, Trey took that over. And when we hired him, he was like, hey, if I do this, I want to actually come up to Toronto and work there with you guys. Which I'm trying to remember exactly, but I think at the time I was kind of surprised. Though. You don't often hear about an American wanting to move to Canada. The classic brain drain is usually north to south. But we got the immigration stuff in check, and Trey came up to Toronto, and then he started blogging, and then he started being on the show. So now suddenly we were 3 people on the show. And do you want me to segue into the 4th edition, or do you have further questions about that?
No, I mean, I guess, you oh yeah, let's go on with the next person, and maybe just talk about like what they brought to the show. I guess you've already been doing that with Trey.
Yeah, well, I will say Trey brought a ton to the show. First of all, from he just obviously he brought his own perspective, but he was also he's a great writer. He's a speedy writer. I've never seen anyone write, and not just coherently, but write well and write funny faster than he can. And he was also great at Photoshop, which, in the internet is an important thing to do to in the pre-meme world, to do funny pictures of basketball players was very, very important. And so he was great, like a huge addition. And then in 2011, the NBA went through a lockout, and we were kind of like, well, what do we do now? What do we talk about every day? Because there was literally nothing to talk about. And we eventually decided that we were going to go on a tour of the US to, I believe it was 9 cities that had basketball teams. And in each city, we were going to record a live podcast with guests from that city and shoot a video. And we would send the video back to Toronto, and they would, put it online, put it on TV, and we would upload the podcast from the road. And we were 5 people: myself, Skeets, Tas, JD, and Trey. And because it was going to be a relatively expensive trip, and we were going to be sharing rooms, we figured, well, we might as well take a 6th person, because, just to kind of even things out, because it's not going to cost us any more in hotels. And we kind of need someone to help us carry stuff and set up stuff. And there was this guy named Leigh Ellis who had worked at The Score from before we had got there. He was Australian. And he was some kind of, segment producer there. And he loved basketball, though. So he would kind of walk by our office and start a conversation about the NBA with Skeets and Tas and Trey. But we really did not know him very well. And he was always like, hey, if you ever need help shooting anything, I'm down to help. And there were a couple times when we did shoots around Toronto where we would be like, hey, do you want to come out today and help us? And he would always be eager to do it. So we asked him, and he was like, yep, I'm in, kind of on the spot. Then I think we found out later that his wife was pretty pregnant. And I think he went home and was like, yeah, I'm going to be leaving for, God, well, we didn't even really, it was basically like 2 months. And there we went off on the road with the 5 of us, 4 friends from Ryerson, Trey, who had been with us for at least a year at that point, I think, and Leigh, this guy that we don't know. So again, at first, Leigh is not part of the show at all. And we do all those live shows. Leigh is not part of it. And then when we came back, we were kind of like, what, do you want to keep working with us? And he was like, yes, definitely. And we kind of went out to the brass at The Score, and we're like, hey, we would like Leigh to join us. And they were like, okay. Which is like kind of speaks to, I think, how lax everything was at the score and how kind of ad hoc it was. There didn't always seem to be a greater plan. But there you go. Suddenly the season starts in December, and Leigh is in our office. And then inevitably, when we go down and record the show, Leigh is in the show. And at first, Leigh's in the the production booth, not in front of the cameras, not on air. And at first, we're like, why don't you be the fact checker? So at the end of the show, if the guys say something wrong, because Leigh, we very quickly realized, had a very encyclopedic knowledge especially for the history of basketball. And we were like, why don't you be the fact checker? So he would do that. And there was just something about him. Immediately realized, like, oh my God, this guy is so funny. And I think I can't remember if it was that summer or the summer after, but it was probably that summer. We record these things called the blank Jones instead of the basketball Jones in the summer. So there's no NBA going on. We came up with kind of like these evergreen topics that had nothing to do with basketball that we could record in the summer, just to create content that our fans could listen to while there was nothing basketball-y happening. And we did this one show where it was like, who is Leigh Ellis, basically, like, an introduction to Leigh Ellis. And we were just asking him questions, and it was so goddamn funny. Like, fall off your chair funny. And then by the next season, like, now something like Leigh is like more and more in the show. And that brings us to 2012. And what happens is, like, I start to think, because I kind of consider one of the parts of my job to, I don't know, think strategically or long term about the show. And there were always rumors that the score was going to get sold. And if it was sold, we were very unclear on what that would mean for us. So I kind of was like, we need to have a backup plan. And so by this point, Nbatv, which is located in Atlanta because it's a joint venture between the NBA, which is in New York, and Turner, which is in Atlanta, and all the studios are in Atlanta. So they had contacted us and said, hey, do you guys want to shoot a couple segments for us and send them down and we'll air them? So every once in a while, we'd shoot something in our studio in Toronto and we'd send it down to Nbatv and they would air it and put it online.
And this is in partnership with the score?
Yes, I think the score, I mean, we certainly weren't making any more money. I'm wondering if they paid the score. They probably did, but I think the score probably mostly looked at it as like a marketing play, like basically just get more eyeballs on the show.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of start thinking, like, what, maybe we could do more stuff with the NBA. Maybe that would be a backup plan. And I remember thinking, okay, well, next year will be the year that we kind of decide to, look at what our prospects are and figure out how to move on. And I remember really well in the fall of 2012, I remember being out for dinner with a friend and I was telling them about it. And she was like, why would you wait? Like, why would you wait a whole year? And I was like, well, because, like, we're still on contract and, everything seems fine. And she was like, well, what's the harm in figuring it out now? And I don't know why, but it lit a fire under my ass. And I was like, we need to figure this out now. The next thing that happened was, this is very coincidental, but Skeets' friend, referenced as my buddy Grish on the show, he had connections through Ticketmaster because he worked for them. And he was like, let's do a guys weekend in Atlanta. And the reason they picked Atlanta was because they could go to a Falcons game and a Braves game all in one weekend. And knowing that Nbatv was in Atlanta, we were out for drinks one day. And the people that were going on the trip were Dave, Skeets, Tas, and Trey. And when we found out, we were out for beers, and I was like, hey, when you're in Atlanta, why don't, I'll call up these people from Nbatv that I've been dealing with, and why don't you go for a drink with them and kind of see what's up? And there was a very negative reaction. Not because they didn't want to work at Nbatv, but because they were like, whoa, yeah, excuse me, like, we're going on vacation for the weekend. We're not going to be spending it, like, having boring conversations about business with people. And after, everyone left, and it was just me and JD drinking, probably on our 10th Guinness, as we did in those days, I was like, we got to go to Atlanta because if we leave it up to them, this is not going to get done. And he was like, okay, I guess we're going to Atlanta. So we kind of played it off like, hey, we're on this, guys trip. What a coincidence. We happen to be in Atlanta. And I contacted the people from Nbatv. I remember it like it was yesterday, not that it was that long ago, but they were like, yeah, sure, let's go out for lunch. So me, JD, and basically the two heads of Nbatv go out for lunch. And we were like, hey, have you ever thought about us doing more stuff for you? And they were like, yes. And we're like, oh, that's great. And they were like, yeah, but before this conversation can continue, just so you know, for you to do more stuff for us, you would have to be in Atlanta. And we were like, oh, okay. The lunch was over. We went back to the guys and we were like, should we even tell them? Like, I mean, some of them had kids, some of them, were
You didn't
married.
even take them to the meeting. So, like, you went on a separate trip to Atlanta?
Yeah, no. This was the trip. Like, this was the quote-unquote guys trip. They were on it for the guys trip. They were going to sporting stuff. And me and JD were just there exclusively to meet with Nbatv, but pretend that it was just kind of a coincidence.
Okay, I see. I thought you were going to still try to loop them into the meeting. But okay, go on, continue.
No, they were not interested. In fact, as I remember, I'm just trying to. I don't want to get this.
Maybe
wrong.
you realized it was a good idea to not bring
them
along.
They didn't want to, and I think also it would have probably been unwieldy to have 6 people there. But I'm pretty sure that after the lunch, they were like, "Well, do you want to go on a tour of our studios?" And considering that they basically said that they wanted to work with us, I was like, "All right, guys, like we're gonna go to the studio." And I remember even then being like, "Oh my god, like what are we? This is so boring. Like just sitting." Watching someone else do a show. But basically, we got back from that trip. Everyone talked it over with their wives and, or girlfriends or kids. And they were like, yeah, if we can make this work, we are willing to move to Atlanta. And basically that year it took almost an entire year because it was like 6 contracts and it was 5 work visas in the US, which are hard to get. I say 5 because Trey was an American citizen, so that wasn't a problem. And then we had to figure out that we were moving 14 people because it wasn't just the 6 of us, it was wives and kids. So we were 14 people. So it was just basically a logistical nightmare. And I was, somehow kind of by default, I guess, in charge of negotiating these contracts because we didn't have an agent. And it moved very slowly. But the next interesting thing that happened was that February, we're still working at the Score, but kind of in the back channel, I'm negotiating with Nbatv, which is like not public at all. One day we get called into a meeting. I'm pretty sure it was February. And the head of the Score sits us down. He's like, yeah, so we're not gonna need you guys anymore because the Score had just gotten sold and the Score got sold to Sportsnet. They kept us with them, but then eventually they realized they were going to create an app. And what did you need, a podcast for? And what did you need video for if you were basically creating an app that did scores and stats? So they were like, we're not going to need you next year. So you're welcome to finish up the season. But then after that, you're done. And we were like, oh, okay. He's like, if you want to go, go home now, like to, I don't mind if you guys leave early and, I'm sorry it had to end like this or whatever. And we're like, okay. And then he walks out and then we just all look at each other and we kind of laughed because we had a job already. And yeah, I remember we went out for a beer. We mourned it for a second. We were like, fuck, thank God that we had been planning our exit strategy this year and not next year, because then we would have been really screwed. And so we finished the year in Toronto. And then September 2013, we moved down to Atlanta, thus commencing phase 3.
Okay. So there was a lot there. I just want to touch on a couple of points. So
yeah, feel free to interrupt me. I'm
no, it's great. It's riveting. That's why I'm happy to let you go on. Uh, but a couple of questions. You talked about the negotiations of the contracts. The 7. Yes, you said 7 contracts you had to negotiate.
No,
Is that
6.
6 contracts? That's right. Talk about that. Like, the idea of that you're not just it's not just the on-air personalities, that the people behind the scenes are really important. Like, was there any contention about who needed to come and any of that?
One thing that we were generally pretty good at was we were like, we've always been good, and to this day, I mean, I say we, I'm not a part of it anymore, but I know because I saw them go through their latest, contract stuff, that we've presented a united front, and that we've realized that if we come to them united, then we will have a better chance of getting what we want than if we come to them 6 people individually. And that was just something that we all stressed. And I can't say that there were like it was completely smooth, but it was generally pretty smooth. And as to why it was me, I guess I don't know, because I kind of done it with the score. I'd kind of been in charge of those negotiations. And I mean, I think this was the one good thing that law school did for me. It
I was
didn't
just
it
gonna
didn't
say.
make me good in terms of, I wasn't looking at these contracts going like, paragraph 11, clause C, no way we're going to agree to that, uh, this is me struggling to come up with any legal term. There's no way we're agreeing to arbitration or whatever. I didn't feel confident in looking at the contract, and we always had a real lawyer look at the contract. But it just gave me a little bit of businessy confidence, even though I suck at business, and I don't. I'm not a good numbers guy. I'm not a good practical guy. But it just made me a little bit more confident that somehow I could do it. And I don't know why, but I considering that we renegotiated our contracts in 2016. When I did the contracts for the first time in 2013, I had no way of knowing if I did a good job. But then I think, knowing what happened in 2016 when we did have an agent, I was like, oh, I did actually a pretty good job at this. So that was good.
Okay. I want to get back to that, but one last point on leaving the score and going to NBA TV is that you lost the name, the Basketball Jones.
Yes.
So maybe talk about how that happened.
Well, the way that it happened was, speaking about my negotiating skills here, we basically came to them during the negotiation, and they said, we must own intellectual property for everything that's on our air, and that's non-negotiable. And so we basically had no other offers. We needed to get a contract to do the show because, again, this is 2009, 2010. We can't hold it together for that much longer, doing it for free. It's going to end soon. So we needed a job then. And once they were basically like, it's a non-starter, I was like, well, one thing I could do is I could just be a pest and push on that, and potentially, jeopardize this deal. Or I could just kind of let them have that and then push in other places like salary, which, to be honest, was much more important to everyone, because we knew, like, what value does the Basketball Jones have to us if they say no, and now we go back to not getting paid for it anymore. Now, of course, long term, in a sense, it could have some value, but we were like, we are the Basketball Jones, so if tomorrow we can't use that name, then we will just come up with another name, which is exactly what happened in 2013 when we went to Nbatv. Now, the funny thing is, when we went to Nbatv and I was working on that deal, they had a passing interest in having the Basketball Jones name, but honestly, not even. Like, they had no interest in buying it from the score because they also wanted to own their own name free and clear, and the Basketball Jones had some potential conflicts because it was the name of like a Cheech and Chong thing, and it was owned by Lou Adler, I think, had a trademark on it. So they weren't even interested in the name anyways. So yeah, it kind of didn't make a difference in the end. And now in 2019, when we left Nbatv, then we came up with another name. So And now finally though, I have to say that I'm pretty sure they do own the name No Dunks, which is their current show. I could be wrong about that, but I'm pretty sure they do. So finally we got to a place where we had enough, currency and I don't know, bargaining power that I guess they were able to keep it.
Okay, so you are now moving to Atlanta, moving to America. Maybe you want to talk about that experience, going to the NBA. You can have another soliloquy.
All right, set your timer. The first year was hell, to be honest. And in retrospect, like, it didn't necessarily feel like hell at the time. It didn't feel great at the time, but looking back, it is like, oh my God, how do we make it through that? And I say that because we go down there, people are not into us being there, like the people at the company. Because what had happened was the heads of the company were like, look, we need to attract a younger demographic. We need to get into podcasting. We need to get into digital video. We don't do any of that. These guys do that. Let's bring them down. But no one at the company really knew who we were. And so when the heads basically, laid us before the people that would actually have to work with us to get a show on air, they were kind of like, who the fuck are these people? You have to understand that at Nbatv, the only people that are on air are former players and former coaches and former GMs. And we obviously were none of those things. And we weren't even American. We were Canadian. So it's like, well, who are these like dorky looking foreigners, that have invaded our network? So people were generally not thrilled. That was thing number one. Thing number two was we were so used to doing an hour of content every day that a half-hour show, which in TV, as you know, is basically like 22 minutes, 30 seconds, seemed like too short a time. Because even an hour-long show is, say, 44 minutes something. And we've been, again, like I said, used to doing an hour. So we thought, why don't we just do an hour every day, like we're doing our podcast, and then we will just, because it wasn't going to be live, we'll just chop it up and insert the commercial breaks. And very quickly we realized that just doesn't work. I mean, there's a reason why TV is TV and podcasts are podcasts. Obviously, the obvious thing is it's a visual medium, and we needed to play to that to make it interesting to people. So we were doing an hour show. So number one, no one likes us. Number two, we're doing an hour show. Number three, we have literally no fucking clue what we're doing when it comes to actually producing a show in a studio. So we went from generally holding a camera that we were holding in front of the guys, filming it, like I said, taking it, uploading it, and editing it at our own, quickly, but at our own pace, adding stuff, and then releasing that. But now suddenly we were having to roll in everything live to tape. And instead of just being the, four guys on set and me and JD behind the camera, there was an associate director and a PA and an audio guy and then an audio assist guy and then engineers and graphics people and editors and a floor director and 3 camera people and a lighting guy. And we just simply didn't know how any of it worked. Why didn't we know how any of it worked? Because we'd never done it before. I mean, we were basically learning how to do studio TV on the fly, and it was, quite frankly, evident because the show was not good. It was not good because JD was directing for the first time. JD was directing a studio show for the first time. I was producing a studio show for the first time. The guys were hosting a studio show for the first time. And it was an hour long. And we were basically responsible for all the content that was going into it. And you can't do that between 6 people, have a daily hour-long show and make it interesting. So we struggled. It's just, this came to mind as like evidence of the fact that we didn't know what we were doing, and also goes back to the whole negotiation thing. I remember one night in Toronto, I was in my apartment, and all like the negotiating with Nbatv, I did it at night generally at my apartment because I didn't want to do it at work. And I'm talking to like the head of Nbatv, and he's asking me about some production questions, and he says to me like, "So do you do your own fonts?" And I'm like, "Do we do our own fonts? What is he talking about?" And I'm just like, okay, I got to delay and through context clues figuring out what this guy is talking about before he realizes that I don't know what the hell he's talking about and completely lose confidence in us and then, not sign this deal. So I'm in my head like, what? Like he's talking like Arial, Helvetica, Times New Roman. Why does he care about the font that we're using? So I'm like, oh yeah, we use our own fonts. And then eventually, through kind of context clues, I figure out that he's talking about what we called chirons, like the lower thirds, the things that you would put up that would, say, Jay Skeets, or if you're, you know, showing B-roll of LeBron James, the thing that would come up underneath it that said how many points, rebounds, assists LeBron had in the game that you were talking about. Now, at the score, we called those chirons. That's just how I knew them. And at Nbatv, they call them fonts. And I had no idea. So that just goes to show you that I had no more of an idea by that fall when I went there, and we were responsible for leading, not just a team of 6 that came up with all the content, but when it came to showtime, it was a team of like 20 something people. So all that to say, to end this monologue, the first year was a struggle. Oh, I'm going to add number 4 thing that made it a struggle was new city, new country, no friends outside the people that you're working with. And we would be together all day, every day in a very stressful environment, kind of flailing about. And by the time Friday night came, we'd leave work. No one wanted to hang out. And, so yeah, it was lonely on top of all that. So those 4 things made it not a great first year.
Okay, so before we get past that first year, you talked about how at the score, they kind of gave you carte blanche to do what you wanted. Um, what was it like that first year at NBA?
Uh, I would say, as general, over the 6 years that we were at Nbatv, we had a lot of creative freedom. The thing that I've always said is there's a difference between creative freedom and neglect. And in this case, it was generally neglect, as in no one paid attention to us. No one, no one checked in on us during the day. No one knew what we were doing. No one asked us. And in a lot of cases, no one was really helping us. So in that sense, we had creative freedom, but it wasn't so much because they were like, hey, you guys are awesome and you're killing it and we have full confidence in you. So here's all the creative freedom you want. It was like, we're busy doing other stuff where our resources are very strained because, Nbatv ran on a shoestring budget in general. So as long as people aren't calling to complain, then just, kind of keep doing what you're doing, I guess. I think they were, as the years went on, they were confident that we were doing what we were doing, that we were doing well, so we could continue doing what we were doing. But yes, we did have a lot of creative freedom at Nbatv.
Okay, so when did you kind of get a hang of things?
The big thing that happened was at the end of the season of that first year. So this is summer 2014. The finals happen, then the draft happens, then free agency happens, then this thing called Summer League happens. So Summer League is in Las Vegas every year, where all the teams take their rookies and these second-year players and some other players that they just want to, keep working out, and they all play against each other in this big tournament. And Nbatv aired those Summer League games, so they wanted to do a show that was a nightly show recapping those games. So kind of like, a sports center for NBA Summer League.
So you said that was 2016?
No, 2014.
Okay, 2014. Okay, good. Okay.
And when we went to do it, so now it's the first time we're producing a show remotely on the road, which has its own set of challenges because you're working in a truck for the first time. And they said, this is a half-hour show. And when we did the half-hour show, we very quickly said to ourselves, this is the way to do it, because you could just trim all the fat from an hour show and you can make you could just focus on these 22 minutes, and you could take only the topics that are really interesting, and then you could focus on making them better. So at the start of the 2015 season, at the start of the 2014-15 season, they were kind of expecting that we'd come back and do an hour-long show, and we really lobbied them hard that summer. And we thought we can do a much better show that will be received a lot better if we do only a half hour. And eventually they agreed to it. And then because we were doing a half-hour show, we felt like we had a little bit more time to devote to a podcast because we'd stopped doing podcasts. And so then we started doing the drop podcast on Fridays again, which was really good for us. So by the second year, we're doing a half hour. To be honest, it's still not great. One thing I didn't mention is that we're just in this giant cavernous studio where all of the NBA TV shows are filmed. And it just wasn't the right vibe for our show because our show is much more intimate and based on the guys just having a conversation. And they looked kind of lost in this giant studio. So second year, we're still in that studio, but we moved the set to kind of a corner so it feels more ensconced. But by third year, I think it was the third year, we'd moved into our own studio. It was this tiny little studio that no one really wanted to use because it didn't have a lot of the bells and whistles, but we loved it because we just felt a lot more at home in there and it felt like our own space. I would really say by the third year was the year when I think it started to click into place for us. And then certainly by the fourth year, so at the end of 2016, our contract was up and we signed a new contract that would take us through 2019. And those last 3 years of the contract, 17, 18, 19, we had it down to a science by that point, I think.
Okay. And I do want to talk about that 2016, but just before that, in 2016, in the winter of 2016, the NBA All-Star Game happens in Toronto. Maybe you can talk about that experience. Is that kind of like a homecoming of sorts?
Yeah, that was awesome, actually. And it was the first and only time at an All-Star Weekend where we had our own space. I don't know. Did you come down to Real Sports?
I was at. I went to. You had a after party.
Okay, well, smart. Yeah, you came to the party. But we were basically doing our show live from Real Sports, that giant sports bar across from the Air Canada Center. No, sorry, the Scotiabank Center. Right?
Yes, it's the Scotiabank Arena now.
Arena, yes. Yeah. Scotiabank Center was what the theater was renamed. The movie theater.
Of course. Yes.
So we were doing our shows from Real Sports. We had our own set. It was super cool. And we had a live audience. So we, had a lot of them were friends and family, but a lot of them were fans that just came down to kind of stand behind the desk and wave signs. And that was really cool. And it was great to have not just the show there, but to have the All-Star Game there. The downside was everyone was like, oh, Canada, the North, crossing the border, it's going to be freezing. It's the igloos and polar bears. Typical kind of American bullshit. And we were like, no, you don't understand. It's not so bad. And it's really the same weather as New York. And actually, Toronto, the winters aren't so bad. And then it ended up being record-setting cold. Like, even we were like, this is too cold. This is too cold for us. And that was a real bummer. Like, it was almost impossible to be outside. I don't know if you remember how cold it was.
I remember how cold it was. I walked from Yonge and Dundas to your after party, which is at...
Oh my God.
I know. But I was in a zone, so...
Okay, yeah, well, it was freezing. So that wasn't... But it was great to see that the NBA was, being embraced in Toronto. So yes, I guess it felt like homecoming. And that after party was actually, I don't know if you had a good time, but it was awesome.
I wasn't feeling the best that day, and so I had to leave a little bit early, but I did enjoy the part of the party that I was at. I loved reconnecting with you guys. You guys were being pulled in a lot of directions, but everybody was super generous with their time, and it was a lot of fun. And I saw there were other people from university who were there to support you, and it was nice to connect with them.
Yeah, it was great to see everyone again. So yes, the Toronto All-Star Game in Toronto was definitely a highlight.
Okay, yeah. So 2016, then you renegotiate your contract, and you mentioned earlier that at now you decided to get agents or an agent. So maybe you could talk about that and that process and having an agent negotiate for you rather than doing it yourself.
Yeah. So as it came time, as the contract was ending, I said to the guys, look, it was one thing for me to negotiate with them when I didn't know any of them and none of us were working for them, but I think it's going to be awkward for me to be negotiating when we work together and then we have to if we sign a deal come work for them again, and sometimes you want the person negotiating, to be a bit of a hard ass. And I was like, I don't think that it would be good for me to do this. So we went out and we found an agent, um, a sports agency that was actually in Atlanta, coincidentally. They had offices in New York and maybe one other place, but they had one in Atlanta, which was actually their head office. And I mean, I was still very, very involved in that negotiation because even though the agent was the one talking to the powers that be, he didn't have any of the information in terms of what were our numbers and what was our working conditions actually like, and what were things we wanted, and um, what were things we felt we could get and things we couldn't, and weaknesses on their negotiating side. So I was still very, very, very involved with that. In that, honestly, too involved, more involved than I wanted to be, and it was not a great negotiation, to be honest. Um, yeah, we didn't really get what we wanted in that negotiation.
And is that just because of the position you were in, or I'm assuming you learned some lessons from that?
Yes, we did learn some lessons. I mean, the one important thing was we had no other concrete offer, which is the number one thing you can obviously have in a negotiation is the ability to walk and to play, two or more people off each other. And we didn't have that, because the thing about doing a basketball show is there's only two places you can do a basketball show. Only two companies in the US have rights to the NBA. One is Turner and one is ESPN. And ESPN already has a ton of people. Then by that point, they had already had The Jump, which is Rachel Nichols' show, which had started after we started Nbatv, but I'm pretty sure it had started by then. So they didn't need more daily NBA content. Then what else is there? There's Fox Sports 1. They had no NBA rights, so that wasn't really an option. And anything that was digital, um, especially in 2016, they had no infrastructure, A, to do a daily studio show, and then B, they didn't have budgets to basically pay six people what we were making to make a podcast every day. So there needed to be a TV component, and there was really only one place we could do it. And I think in some sense they probably knew that. Um, Maybe the best negotiating we had was, well, fuck it, we'll just move back to Canada, which I guess was reasonable, but we certainly wanted to stay. And then the other thing was that I don't know. I don't know how the actual negotiations went, because I wasn't in the room. But I don't think that we were super happy with our agent, as evidenced by the fact that that agent was no longer with us by the time we did this new deal, or they did this new deal. Um, so yeah, it was, one of the main thing we wanted was we wanted green cards, because we were on these work contracts, which are work visas, which are temporary, and you're tied to your employer. So let's just say they fired us at some point. We would have to leave the country immediately, because we would have no legal standing in the country. Or let's say I wanted to leave and take a job in marketing at Coke, another Atlanta company. I couldn't do that, because as soon as I sever my employment contract with Turner, I am now an illegal alien. So, and we constantly were having to reapply for these temporary work visas, and there was never a guarantee that you were going to get them. So it made us very unstable. So one thing we wanted was for them to pay for the legal process of us getting green cards, and they, bottom line, didn't. So that was that kind of hurt. Basically we were just asking for kind of the stability to feel like we were actually tied to the country that we were working in. And on our own, some of us went ahead and started the green card process after that. And I'm lucky enough that I did it soon enough that I got my green card, kind of just as Trump was sliding in to royally screw everything up. But yeah, it didn't work out so great. But I mean, at the end of the day, we were reasonably happy. We were, making good money still, and we quickly left it behind us, and we're like, oh, we got a show to make, and we continued to make the show for 3 years.
Yes, and you mentioned that during those 3 years, you were really firing on all cylinders. Is that fair to say? Like you were really producing the show well? Like
I think
the
so. I
team?
mean, I finally felt like I knew what I was doing. It's funny. It's like when you're doing live TV. I remember when we started, I'd be so sweaty and nervous before every show because, say we were going live at 6 p.m., the clock would start ticking down, and I'd be like, oh my God, like, what if we screw up? What if we go to the wrong thing? What if they say something wrong? It just seemed like, my prevailing feeling was fear. And then at a certain point, it became excitement. Like, oh, going live is fun because anything can happen. And instead of, being scared of that, you saw that as an opportunity or a way to make the show feel more immediate and more vital. And then at as hard as it, like, if you had told me when I started producing live television, there's going to be a time when this will seem old hat to you, like when your heart won't be beating any faster, I'd be like, are you crazy? And that's exactly what happened. Like, it became sort of so blasé to go live. It was just like, oh, all right, here we go. And I guess I take that to mean that there was just a certain amount of competence and confidence, certainly in those last 3 years that we were doing it.
Okay, that's great. I thought that's terrific. One thing I want to just ask you, sort of before we leave that era, did it ever? I mean, maybe you mentioned this before. I don't ever recall you talking about this, but did it ever come up that you are like 6 white guys talking about basketball in the middle of Atlanta?
Uh, did it come up? It came up in the sense that I certainly said it. Yeah. It came up in the sense that the most common way it was said to us would be an angry commenter on, let's say, Twitter or Facebook or something. And it would be people that had no idea what our show was, and they would be flipping channels, and they'd come to this on Nbatv, and they'd be like, what the fuck are there 4 white guys on, and they would usually say like 4 skinny, nerd-ass white guys talking about the NBA. And when I would put myself in their position, I would be, angry internet comment aside, I'd be like, I was very sympathetic to that because I think it would be kind of crazy if you thought, like, if this is what you thought. NBA TV one day decides, we're going to start a new show. So they go out and they cast people. And then they cast 4 people. And all 4 of those people are white males. Like, that is absurd. I mean, it was absurd in 2013 and only became more absurd as each year went on. But I guess what they didn't know was that that's not how the show started. The show started between friends that were friends from college and, created this following and then eventually got picked up by NBA TV. But yeah, it's
But it
weird.
never came up professionally, I guess. That's so.
It's actually a really good question because I wonder to what extent it was talked about above our heads.
Mhm.
I don't know the answer. It was not really ever directly said to me.
Well, that's good.
And certainly, they hired us again for that second contract, but I can't imagine it wasn't remarked upon by executives that it is odd to have such a non-diverse show, especially, like I said, once you get into the year 2017s and 18s and 19s.
Okay, so you're in these last 3 years, and I don't know if maybe you're sort of alluding to things when you talk about your heart not beating as fast for these live shows, but I guess what happens at the end of the run, of this 2019 run?
Well, the run for me was, you got to go back to 2016 when we're negotiating the second contract. I was going through a period where I was just a little bit frustrated with with the show, but to be frank, with the guys. Like, I'm not saying anything that I haven't said to them. When you work every day, in a high pressure situation with people, you can, in a creative endeavor where a lot of the work is shooting down other people's ideas and other people shooting down your ideas or saying they don't like something. Um, and if you can't find a way to do that well, to have a creative process where people don't feel rejected in like a mean spirited way, then it can be, you know, it can be not fun. And I think by that point it had been, 7 years that I was working with the guys, and I was a little bit worn out. I mean, I still, don't get me wrong, every day was so thankful, and I was like, this is the greatest job in the world. I thought it was the greatest job in the world for all 10 years that I did the job. But I said, I'm down for signing this next contract, which we knew was going to be 3 years, but I'm not 100% sure that I'm going to continue after that. So in 2016, I had said that to the guys, and they knew that. So our contract is kind of coming up, and by all accounts, it seems like they're going to want to sign us to another contract. And by this point, we have new agents, agents that we really like and are really on top of things. And they're like, yep, from what we're hearing, from multiple sources inside the company, is things are looking good. The big thing that happened was AT&T bought Time Warner. Time Warner owned Turner, and Turner Sports and Nbatv were subsidiaries of that. The problem was that the merger didn't go through right away because Time Warner also owns CNN, and Trump's Justice Department basically held up the merger because of that, because he was pissed at CNN. And this thing was in limbo for, God, I think it was like 2 years. So it wreaked havoc on everything at the company, because for the entire time when the merger was rumored to be going through, no one wanted to spend a penny because they didn't know how things were going to work out. Then the merger happened and they didn't want to spend a penny because they were like, well, we don't know what's going to happen when our new overlords come in. And then that feeling was, instead of being held up for a few months, was held up for many months into years because it was tied up in the courts. So everyone was just basically standing pat. I remember February 2019, it's the All-Star game in Charlotte. JD and I had our annual performance reviews at All-Star. And they were like, yep, everything's great. We love the show. We love, we use you guys as the example for how to take stuff from your TV show and then disseminate it online, and to build an online following, and to do digital. And we had the youngest, they didn't say this, but we had the youngest demographic at the network. So, things, not to say we were getting tons and tons of viewers on TV, at least, but relative to what anything at the network got, we were doing well. Plus, we were, getting over 100,000 people a day watching our show on YouTube, plus the podcast, plus the small, clips that we were cutting up that were going on Twitter and Facebook. So we were doing well, and it seemed like they were happy with us. And like I said, the agent said they were happy. So going into summer 2019, we thought they're going to, definitely make us an offer. About a month after those performance reviews, we get called into a meeting, all six of us, with the basically heads of Nbatv. And this is like mid-March. And they're basically just like, yeah, we know you guys aren't from here and you have, various legal situations in the country. So we just want to give you as much lead time as possible to know that at the end of the season, we will not be renewing your contracts. And we're like, huh? Okay. Why? And to this day, I can't really give you an answer. I mean, I suppose the answer is the merger finally went through, and AT&T came in and said, we're slashing budgets or we're reorganizing things, and our contract was coming up and we were a big line item on it, 6 people's salaries plus the cost of doing the show, obviously. And they were like, well, if we eliminate that, we can save the money that we need to save, according to our new bosses. And I think that is why. Now, did they love us so much that they were like, no way, we got to cut this money somewhere else? That's the part that I'm a little confused about. Like, did they fight it? Did they want to fight it? Did they care to fight it?
Mm-hmm.
I don't really know any of that. And I don't even really know for sure that they ever specifically said, oh yeah, it's because of the merger and blah, blah. But I think, that's kind of what we've pieced together. So I don't really even fully know the exact story. But basically, we find out in March. Our contracts aren't up till September. So we found out April, May, June, July, August, like a full 6 months before our contract's up, we find out that we're basically not going to be working there anymore, but that we're going to be doing the show until the end of the season. So that's like mid-June. So we said to ourselves, like, we can't tell anyone here because it's going to be really awkward coming into work every day if everyone that we work with knows that we're not coming back. So we basically kept it a secret for a long time. And of course, the hilarious thing that starts to happen is the Raptors aren't losing. And our hometown team that everyone knows that, everyone that watches the show knows that Skeets and Tas are diehard Raptors guys. This team that's never really won anything is going to the finals, and they ended up obviously winning the championship. And they got to do the show, one of the shows from Toronto before one of the games. JD and I were in Atlanta, directing and producing from the studio in Atlanta, from the control room in Atlanta. But Skeets was there when they won, which was super cool. And it was a very poetic end that our last show was the Raptors winning. That was our last TV show.
Yeah, it was really awesome. It was actually kind of a weird thing for me, to talk about myself again.
Hey, man, jump in. I'm tired. I don't know if you could hear, but I'm slowly going hoarse.
No, you're fantastic, Matt. This is more than I could have dreamed of. But yeah, I'll give you a little break. Very poetic. You guys are doing, this last season of the show. It's the Raptors are there at the same time. And for me as well, I've been a big Raptors fan. I've watched you guys all this time. I've always taken pride. There's been so many times where I've been like in a bar and you guys are on the TV and I'm like, yeah, I know those guys, those guys. And maybe that says I have a drinking problem, but I just always had this pride, even though it's like I'm not involved, but it's just, I don't know, there's something about your success that was great. But leading up to that final game, my favorite band is Tool, and Tool in 2019.
I don't know if you put that on the hard drive, but I would not have listened to it.
That's fine. I'm not an asshole Tool fan. I usually just keep it to myself. They're fun,
That's
right?
fair. That's fair.
Right. But they had not released an album for 13 years. Mm-hmm. And the Basketball Jones started in 2016. So, and the album itself is really emotional. And so, I don't know, just all these things coming together in 2019, like the Raptors winning, you guys coming to the end, at least of the starters era, and that album, I don't know, and some other things, I don't know, it was like 2019 is sort of like compared to 2020, pretty awesome. Yeah.
I mean, I'm not the first person to point this out, but remember like in 2019 when like Prince and Bowie and Tom Petty died and people were like, this is the worst year ever. I can't wait for 2020. Or was that no, that was 2018.
Yeah, that was before that. Yeah.
Yeah, then 2019 sucked. And then people were like, well, 2020, and then now it's it sucked way more than anyone could have ever imagined.
Yeah. Okay, so sort of before we conclude then with this, well, actually, I do want to just end there. At least you were still sort of wavering on if you wanted to come back and join them, and obviously now they couldn't come back to the Nbatv and the starters. So what happened from that point?
So, like I said, it was March when we found out. But even before March, knowing that it's this, potential contract negotiation is coming up, I've been thinking about it on my own, and I'm like leaning towards moving on. And very soon after we found out that we weren't going to be coming back to NBA TV, I mean, I think that week, maybe even that day, we went to the bar, as we always do, to think. And I guess, hey, we also have drinking problems, so don't feel alone. And I was like, what do you guys think? Like, do you guys still want to do this? Not knowing, maybe they would say like, look, we want to move back to Canada. We miss our families, or we're tired of working together or whatever. And to a man, everyone was like, no, we built something really special. We want to keep, and we love doing it, and we want to keep doing it. And then I was like, I think I'm going to move on. And they were like, in a sense, I think expecting it. And they're also, some of my best friends, and they're also very, very nice and supportive people. And they're like, yeah, go do whatever you want to do. And like, we couldn't be happier for you. And we support you. And we'll miss you, but you got to do what you got to do. And so starting, obviously, then for the rest of the shows, I stayed on at Nbatv working with them. But as our agents went forward, they were pitching the show as a fivesome. And basically what happened was they pitch it around, and now we're at the point where there are some digital outlets that are, kind of finally big enough and generating revenue to hire people to specifically do podcasts. And The Athletic, which is a giant sports site that's a subscription service, they wanted to get more into podcasting, and they wanted to have something outside of their subscription paywall to entice people into the paywall. And the starters were great ambassadors to them, and great way to do that. And they hired them, I guess, in late summer 2019. And I don't know if you still listen to the show. I've listened to, first of all, they put out a podcast every single day, sometimes twice a day. And I think I've listened to like 95% of them, I think. And I love listening to them. And they're doing great over there. They're really successful.
Yeah, I do listen to them. I've listened to them through the years, and I haven't listened to that much this year, I have to be honest. But yeah, I'm going to continue to listen to them. I always love the basketball content, obviously, but I think, what people love about you guys is also that non-basketball content. You guys talking about, just sort of that barbershop talk. That's just so much fun. And yeah, I'll definitely keep listening. And I think the Athletics is such a great platform. It's a really cool space, and I'm really happy for them.
I'm so happy for them, because I think it's so much fun what they're getting to do, like kind of back to the roots. But The Athletic is not headquartered in Atlanta, so they have a little office space that obviously they're not going to right now. But they have like this little office where they would go in every day, record the podcast in that room, kind of set their own schedule. They're more or less their own bosses.
So they
And
decided to stay in Atlanta, everybody?
yeah, that was one of their stipulations. They told our agents, they're like, we really want to stay here. They had put down roots. We had, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 kids that were born in Atlanta.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah, of course. Yeah, it's home.
And so and JD's kids are older, and they were in school, and they had friends, and we actually loved Atlanta. We did not like it in year one, for sure, but we ended up really, really liking it. And some people bought houses, and it's just a great city to live in, because obviously the weather is very good, or at least compared to most of Canada, and it's relatively inexpensive as far as major cities go, and it's got a huge airport. It's easy to get anywhere. So they wanted to stay in Atlanta, and they're very happy there. And I was supposed to go visit them in May, which I was very excited to do. But it didn't happen. Can't remember why. Anything big happening now?
I'm not sure. I was supposed to go to Vancouver for at the end of May, and that got canceled. Just like I'm not sure. I just said I'm not going to look into it.
Yeah, I said I'm not interested. They were pissed. They were like, "Oh, you don't like us anymore?" And I was like, "No, I don't. I'm not coming."
Yeah.
So yeah, that's where they are, and I guess I can sum up what's happened to me since then very quickly, which is that it had always been my dream to work in TV, but my dream was really more doing it for comedy and drama, for scripted stuff. And the truth was that really what I wanted was to be creative. And in my 10 years working with the Basketball Jones and the Starters, I got to be creative every single day. And if I thought of an idea at 8 in the morning, I got to see it on TV that night. And it was incredibly rewarding to have such agency over what I was doing every day. And I loved it. And one thing I haven't highlighted, which I'll take this time to do, is I cannot express how fun it was, 90% of the time, to be in a room all day with those 5 guys who are so funny. And quite frankly, I think, we're all funny together. And there was not a day that didn't go by, whether I was, in a shitty mood or someone else was in a shitty mood, where I didn't have at least one laugh where I was pretty much on the floor laughing. And, on good days, it would be 5 or 6 times. And that is obviously what I miss the most. And that's what I think about the most, is just how fun it was to work with those people every day. Why did I start going on that? Because I miss them? I do miss them. But anyways, right. No, I know I was talking about that. So for 10 years, I'd never even thought about anything else I wanted to do because I was so fulfilled by it. But as time went on, I was like, I'm getting older. If I'm going to see if I can do this other thing, work on dramatic or comedic television, I should probably try now. And so at the end of in the fall, I basically moved down to LA to try to break into the entertainment industry down here. And I really have nothing to report. I came down here. I know some people down here, and I met some people down here through the show who I met were all super nice. Shout out to them for welcoming me to their city. But I was taking some writing classes. I was taking some improv classes, mostly just to meet people. And I was trying to write some stuff on my own. And then basically COVID happened, and I've been, alone in my apartment since mid-March.
And it's this. I mean, it's so. This is such a earth-shaking time. Are you rethinking your plans? Has that changed at all? What you want to do, or? I mean, I know it's a hard. It's like there's so much uncertainty around everything. It's like it's such an unfair question.
Well, I tend towards pessimism and darkness and unhappiness. So the truth is, I've been really avoiding thinking about it, because when I start to, I really spiral, and I don't see an end, and I don't see it working out, quite frankly. And I am like, what the fuck am I doing here? Like, I'm essentially in a city I don't really know. I mean, I'm in 600 square feet of a city that I don't know, that has shut down in an industry that is about production, and to do production is you need large groups of people getting together. And it's not even like I'm in, I have a foot in the door and I'm like, okay, well, this is just a hiatus. And then when it goes back to quote unquote normal, I will, I'll just go back to my old life, and things will start progressing again. But I'm on hold for nothing right now. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
yes.
when it ends, part of this whole process for me is networking and meeting people. he can't meet people right now. And when this ends, I assume it's not going to be high priority for anyone to be meeting people, if even that is a thing that happens. So it is a little bit dark, to be honest. Now, I don't. It's not like I'm like, oh, I should have just stayed in Atlanta. I don't really regret that, because even if this doesn't work out, I needed to know that it didn't work out. I needed to fail at it so that I could go, well, that's something I tried. Like, that was the year I lived in LA, and that was weird. But now I'm doing something else. Um, I think I've been doing the show for 10 years. It's not like I love the show that they're doing now and I miss them a ton, but I don't necessarily wish I was still working on the show, if that makes sense.
No,
But I am at a point of very deep uncertainty that you've caught me at.
I think I think what you're feeling is what millions of other people are feeling. So I think, it's, I think people are going to be thankful that you shared that. And I have no doubt that many people share the same concerns about their jobs and their careers. I mean, there's so many sectors that were so obviously hit right away from the pandemic. People have talked about restaurants are like this is the most obvious sector. But yeah, the entertainment industry is completely shut down. You have to have people, several people in close quarters to produce this content, and that's just one of many, many industries. So I think you sharing your fears and anxiety is helpful because other people have them as well, and I think that's a way for them. People can take solace that others are in the same place.
Yeah, well, if that's helpful, then I'm going to end there, because if I talk any more about it, it's going to go from helpful to, hey, you're really bumming us out, man.
Okay. Well, so then maybe I can flip that around a little bit and just go back to sort of the end of the starters and maybe you can talk about, like, I know you said you're not really a basketball fan, but through all those years, you had some opportunities to meet some people that are icons. Like, I think about Shaquille O'Neal. Like, I would love to meet Shaquille O'Neal. I watched him. He was the most dominant player I ever saw. And so I don't know if you have any memories about meeting anybody or any experiences like that stand out for you.
Well, yeah, I mean, the thing is, you start working at Nbatv, and then, like I said, the only people that work there are former players and coaches and GMs, the people on air. So they're just walking around all the time. The truth is, though, that these guys generally played in the, sometimes in the late 80s and the 90s. And the first time that I ever saw a basketball game was when we were at Ryerson and I was friends with Tas, and he took me to my first Raptors game. So that we're talking like 2003 probably. So I knew, and then I knew very little about the NBA before then. So it didn't do anything for me to see, for instance, Dennis Scott or Steve Smith. No offense to those people, obviously. They're super nice, but it wasn't like I was starstruck. But it was so cool watching Skeets and Tas and Leigh and Trey see like people that they loved. And I was almost like living vicariously through them. Now I will say the one person that the first time I got excited was Shaq, and it happened like we were just having a production meeting in this kind of communal space near where like the makeup chair is and everything, and we were recording our show during the day at that time, and Shaq only came in at night. But I don't know why he was in that day to shoot like maybe a commercial for the General or something, and he just like walks in, and this is such a cliche, but I could not believe how big he was. I mean, he so big even relative to the other NBA players that were there. And just having him acknowledge us, like, "Hey, what's up, guys?" Because it's like, when normally you're in a celebrity scenario, like you see someone on the street, it would only be you going up to them and asking for their time. But in this situation, because we worked for the same company. Not that he necessarily really knew who we were at the time, probably, but he was just like, "Hey, what's up? Oh yeah, you guys are those guys." And that was the first time I was like, "Holy shit!" Like, Shaq's talking to us. That's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to think if there was other. And then like you know, seeing like Steph Curry talk to like Leigh and stuff like that. I didn't have a relationship really with any of the players. But yeah, I mean, like, name someone that's in the NBA and we've interviewed him, or at the very least, like, been in an elevator at an All-Star game with them. And honestly, the coolest thing was seeing those current players, like stars in the game, see our guys and be like, oh, hey, it's Trey. Or, hey, it's Skeets, or it's Tas, or it's Leigh. Like, that was so cool. Like, when the Cavs won their championship, Trey was there as a correspondent, and he runs into the locker room when they win, and they're popping champagne and smoking cigars, and he's trying to interview people to, for a piece for the show. And he's like, Kyrie, like, you just hit one of the biggest shots of all time. I'm sure you remember the three in Game 7. And he's like, how do you feel? And Kyrie, the first thing Kyrie says is like, oh, hey, man, I love your show. I watch it all the time. It's like, you just won a championship, like, and you're taking the time to, like, congratulate Trey. And then Trey, like, and then he's like, goes and puts a mic in front of Tristan Thompson. And Tristan Thompson's like, oh, I remember you, like, you ran on a treadmill during the show once. It's like he'd watched the show. Like, that was always the coolest thing, seeing people, react to the guys. Like, Giannis always was shouting at Tas because Tas once called him overrated in like 2014 or something.
Oh my. That's some Jordan level memory there,
Yeah. Well, when he won the MVP last year, we sent him an award for the Starties, like our own shitty but funny award show that we did. And in his acceptance speech, which he sent in via video, he said, "I want to thank Tas Melas for motivating me because he called me overrated." And they've got a Greek connection there too.
Yes, that's amazing. That's great.
And Guy Fieri, that was a starstruck moment for me when.
Oh, really?
Trey, I was out with Trey Kerby one night at All Star late one night, and we come upon Guy Fieri and they fist bump, and Guy Fieri's like, "When are you going to have me on your show?" And I'm like, Guy Fieri wants to come on our show? That's weird. But he did. It was great.
Awesome. That's fantastic. That's so great. Well, it was great to watch the show for all those years, and of course I'm going to continue watching it. Matt, I can't thank you enough for your time. It was so much fun. It's been 2 hours, if you can believe it.
Is like, what is this, like a Pete Holmes show? I mean,
hey,
at the end?
Hey man, the wind has just been in your sails, and you've been moving like you're in some boat race. What's that famous boat race?
America's Cup.
There you go. You're like you were sailing through the America's Cup. It was tremendous performance. Thank you so much, Matt. Is there anything that you want to tell the people out there? Anything you want to say to anyone listening?
No. Thanks if you've ever consumed any piece of the Basketball Jones or the starters or the free agents or No Dunks, thank you very much. We do have like the greatest fans that have sent us some of the nicest emails that have oftentimes made me cry, with people being like, I started listening to your show when I was in the 7th grade and I still listen to it now and I'm in college. And just because the show has gone on for 14 plus years, so many people have grown older with the show, and it's just crazy to be a part of people's lives in some small way. And so to any of them, thank you very much. And thanks to you, Phil, for having me on.
Thanks, Matt. That's a terrific place to end it. Thanks again for coming on the show, and hopefully it won't be 4 years till we speak again.
Well, it might be 4 years so I could travel back to Toronto, so we'll see.
All right. I'll keep the optimistic view on your behalf. Thank you so much to Matt Osten for joining me. I had so much fun catching up with you, and thank you to everyone listening at home. We'll be back soon with another episode.